Hello, and thank you for tuning into In Our Alexis with your host, Alexis Mariana. Today, our film is going to be discussing Black men in America, our chocolate men, our fine chocolate men. So, some of the things that I will be discussing is Black men from when they started arriving here until modern day. Since it is such a broad statement and such a broad topic, I narrowed it down to 3 different categories. So today we are going to be looking at Black men in education, Black men in law, and Black men in social platforms. So at the end of my video, my goal is to give us both a better understanding of how these men are affected, how they are treated, and the way they feel. Thank you. So let's get started. Before we can jump right into law, we have to understand a little bit of the background about the Americas and how it was formed. So to begin, in 1607, the colonies were established, which brought boats of British Americans to the U.S. Of course, the land had a surplus of food, agriculture, and nice conditions to live in, so they decided to stay. And then in 1642 until 1662, there were laws and established saying that women can be taxable and any child born of a slave woman shall also be a slave. So set the bar of differences between social groups. The next years following that, their population of blacks increased from 300 to 3,000. As the population of African Americans in America grew, so did the laws implemented. They became stricter and reflected racism and more separation between the two ethnic groups. The laws now began limiting the power of blacks. Some of the laws that were implemented were no owning of weapons. If you were caught running away, you can be killed. No marrying outside of your race. No jury trials for people of color. And a couple more laws were implemented. Then, in 1712, Willie Lynch wrote a speech called The Making of a Slave, which gave whites an insight on how to treat and control a slave. He stated that he uses fear, trust, and envy for control purposes, and in order to fully control a slave, you must put the old black man against the young black man against the old black man, the dark slave against the light slave, and the light-skinned slave against the dark-skinned slave. In addition, you must put the male versus the female and the female versus the male. This speech was very much recognized during this era and gave way to how to treat people of color. Within these years, there were also slave patrols established. Slave patrols, similar to the cops that we have now, have similar stars and were solely there to make sure that a slave stays with their owner. Again, with the increase of African Americans and slave laws, as well as more slaves, they created the Missouri Compromise in 1820 that separated the northern and southern states, saying that the southern can own slaves and the northern cannot. And then a couple of years after that, war broke out between the North and South because the North wanted to focus on economic growth and the South wanted to keep slaves. This became a problem because the North said that in order to increase their revenue and increase industrial revolutions, they must decrease the amount of slaves, and the South was on the opposite side of this debate. This war lasted for a couple of years. And then in 1896, Jim Crow created the Jim Crow laws that stated separate but equal. Jumping past a couple of years, World War I began in 1917, and blacks had a little bit more freedom, so they were able to fight in World War I despite the racial tensions that were stirring in the country. In addition to that, when the war was over, they also fought in World War II. Once again, racial tensions were at its all-time high. There were color separations. People of color could not do much. And then this is when we began to see our political leaders take a rise. Leaders such as Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and the NAACP all took action against protecting rights for blacks in America. Of course, now that we no longer have slave patrols, we have modern day policemen, which also do a great job in limiting the power of a black man. For example, in the 1980s, the Tennessee versus Garner, Graham versus Connor case allowed police to use deadly force if reasonable. So, if people of color are resisting or attempting to flee, policemen do have a right to use deadly force. In addition, with the police laws, many of the police, with their power that they have, will overuse their power. As we have seen in recent news that there are more colored people than ever being arrested and charged for crimes that a white person wouldn't necessarily be charged for. This aspect is important to understand in our society because it is the way that black males are limited. The following topic that I wanted to talk about is how black men are viewed in education. Upon reading a couple of articles, I got a consensus of how black men feel in college and in grade school. To begin, we'll start with grade school. There is, from pre-K, a lot of prejudice towards black men in education. Once again, we see this recurring theme of the black male being underrepresented in grade school as well as college. In addition, I will provide a couple of statistics. Black boys are 3 times more likely to be suspended than other males in grade school, and when they hit college and high school, they will have a higher chance of experiencing more discrimination. Approximately 52% of black men in college say that they face discrimination with people thinking that they are not educated. Approximately 55% reported that people will act suspicious around them compared to the 38% who do not attend college that feel that they also sense a difference between themselves and other racial groups acting different towards them. In addition, these men also mention discrimination in parties, social classes, education, history, among many other subjects that are talked about in classes and when attending school. The next topic that I will be touching on is how media platforms represent the black male. To begin, media platforms such as social media, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter, as well as news articles, both on TV and in the online periodicals, show a negative, exaggerated, and threatening image of the black male. Most stories that are put out by these social media and other media platforms always include the problems of black males. For example, when we hear of another police shooting or gang-related crime, the news platforms often associate the crime, including mugshots, and they center the story around poverty and issues that black men face within their culture. Some of the issues that they face are discrimination, violence within their own community, as well as socioeconomic disparities. So unconsciously, by watching these news platforms and hearing it on a day-to-day basis, it enforces a negative stereotype with this community. That's not to say that all news outlets show a negative view of the black man. However, when a black man is shown as a good or as a nice and non-violent man, they often fall into the sports and entertainment categories. The problem with this is that it gives a limited positive representation of the black male, mainly looking at his physical attributions. So despite that there may be both negative and positive stories in the social media and other media platforms, there is a problem that social media platforms possess, which is a challenge to advocate for black leaders. There has been patterns in social media and other media platforms that show a limited representation of black leaders and more often than not, these stories are very rarely touched on. To summarize, the media platforms often show a distorted and limited representation of how to view the black men, and in turn, this affects how the black male society and foreigners view the black men. Okay, so now that we have went over some of the laws, how social media affects, and as well as education, I do have a couple of interviews that I set up just to get a better understanding of how these men feel in America. And some of the questions that I asked them are the following. Do you feel as if there is equal opportunity?
When it comes to work, when it comes to finances, when it comes to just daily living, there's not equal opportunity amongst certain racial groups.
No, we don't have equal opportunities, especially when it comes to job or laws related. As I can be out with a group of friends, the police will come and ask us questions about regarding what are we doing, instead of white people, they just see them and just wave their hands or whatever and just go past. And as a job related, it's like I have to do so much more, not be myself other than white people.
Have you had that experience happen to you regarding the police?
Yeah, especially with the police, with the group of friends we have. Even though we're all in college, we still get looked at as bad people or thugs.
Okay. Do you feel that African American history was taught adequately in grade school and in college?
Definitely not.
Right.
The only part that they show is just the psychological aspect that we had to endure, and then them forcing us into the Civil War that we didn't want to be a part of. Not only that, they only do a brief history. They talk about the same people throughout elementary, middle school, and high school. W.E.B. Du Bois. Who else? Slavery.
Martin Luther, Civil Rights Movement.
Yeah, Civil Rights Movement, etc.
No, not really. Even in February, when it's Black History Month, we really don't learn anything about Black history. We still just move on as Black people is nothing. We still, we talk about it a little bit, but it don't get recognized as much as white people do.
What is the last thing you saw on social media pertaining to people of color?
We get discriminated a lot. Last thing I seen that really hurt me is when this pregnant black lady was shot by the police. That really hurt my heart. It's not just black males, it's black women also.
Was it on Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat?
Yes, it was everywhere. Everywhere I looked, every app I looked, it was there.
Cool.
The last thing that I seen was this pregnant lady being shot, I guess. And then the thing before that was the gang violence surrounding Nipsey Hussle. And then prior to that, the ridicule and criticism of Kanye West for doing an interview with Trump. And then the shooting of Stephon Clark was before that, I think.
Okay, so that was the end of my video. Just a little bit of purpose as to why I created the video is because I wanted to get a little bit of a better understanding and just have acknowledgement as to what is going on in society and around us. And I hope that in creating this video, you and I both learned a little bit about something more about how things are implemented, the way things work, and hopefully in the future or in the near future, when you see something like what I talked about happening, you can take action and create opportunities for yourself and for others. And so thanks for tuning into In the Hour of Alexis with your host, Alexis Mariana. I'll see you guys later.